It is my very great pleasure now to introduce our chair, Donna Hall. Many of you, she will not need an introduction to many of you. Donna, of course, is a community power guru. I think she can be given that award. Donna was, of course, Chief Executive of Wigan Council and was really pushing the community power agenda many years ago before it became a real thing, and is now working in the NHS as chair of Bolton Foundation Trust, and is our chair, of course, and doing a great job on spreading the community power message. Donna, just quickly, before we go into your panel, I just wanted to quickly ask you one question. It's been such a challenging year, but it's also been a year in which I think many people have, as I said, learnt about community power. What have you learned from this year about how you make community power a reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to imagine that it's 2 years ago since you and Jess wrote the community paradigm, Adam, and since then, I think everything that's happened has kind of pointed to that being the way, which is just, remarkable. But in the last 12 months in particular, a year since we last met, and what a completely different place the world is from a year ago, I think we've seen that kind of very sharp bringing into focus of three major problems that have brought about a kind of existential crisis for us as a society, not just in the UK, but internationally, globally. So we've seen the crisis of coronavirus. We've seen how we weren't prepared for it. So despite having an amazing NHS and lots of emergency preparedness sessions over the years, we weren't ready. The world wasn't ready for a pandemic, despite the fact that we knew one was coming. So that's the first C, coronavirus. Second one is the credit crisis that we've seen, where markets are just not resilient to withstand the impact of something like this. Our markets are built on sand, not just what we've seen since 2008 and the global economic crash, but we need a different type of market, really, which is much more responsive and rooted in communities and what they want and what they need. And then finally, we've seen climate change, and the climate crisis has been, again, exacerbated in the last 12 months. So that three kind of pronged crisis of credit, corona, and climate. But what we have seen is the third C, which is community, which has really come to the fore. And we've seen that, without community and without the brilliant work that's gone on in local neighbourhoods, protecting people who've been shielding, supporting community and voluntary efforts, public services would have fallen over without them. So we've seen really, and incredibly starkly, just the importance of communities. But communities are not just there for a crisis. They're there every day. And I think we're going to hear in the next 3 days some fantastic examples of where people are embedding what they've learned during this crisis and making it just the way they work differently with communities, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant summary of what's been an incredibly complex and challenging year, but I think you captured it really well. And it's a great lead-in as well to our first panel, which Donna herself is going to be chairing, which is Community Power, a Public Service Revolution. I'll hand over to Donna to take that forward.
Thanks very much, Adam. I mean, really championing community power within an organisation or within a place can be quite tough. It can be really difficult because the computer says no very often. The rules that we have to govern public services by kind of mitigate against us trying to work differently with communities. So it can be quite difficult, quite hard, and quite lonely. So the next 3 days are going to be a real place of psychological safety here, gathering where we can just be really honest. We can learn some practical lessons from each other and be a kind of mutual support network. So at New Local, we've got a network of just over 60 councils working together, and we're getting NHS organisations interested as well. So here today, we've got around 1,200 people registered over the 3 days, which is amazing. Some from councils, some from NHS organisations, housing organisations, and some brilliant community, voluntary and neighbourhood groups are joining us as well. So a really brilliant mix of people who are here to share from each other, learn from each other, and apply then some of the learning that they've learned from the next 3 days. So my panel are just amazing people. I know them all really well. I describe them as friends. They've helped me, and hopefully we've helped each other over the last few years, trying to embed a different way of working within our organisations. So the first speaker, who's going to outline her vision for community power, is the Deputy Chief Executive of East Ayrshire up in Scotland, the brilliant Katie Kelly. She's like a ball of energy. We did a lot of learning from each other when I was at Wigan in East Ayrshire. We were kind of a mutual support for each other. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Katie.
Well, thanks very much, Donna, and good morning, everyone. I'm just so delighted to be here with such an amazing network of people. I feel that this is really symbolic, as Donna said. I think just now we're probably at a real crossroads in terms of public service and how we serve communities for the future. And exactly the 3 C's that were balanced off with community is absolutely spot on. And in East Ayrshire, community power is at the heart of our transformation strategy. And really just a wee bit of background, we reached the crossroads probably back in around about 2011-12 in East Ayrshire. We knew we had to do something different. We had, really big drop in public sector funding, which many of you have experienced here, changes in demography, increases in demand, a much widening inequalities gap that just wasn't acceptable in the 21st century, and of course exacerbated by welfare reform. So about 7, 8, 9 years ago, we decided to look at a different way to engage with our communities, and we wanted to transform our relationship with the communities we serve. Fast forward now to 2021, and we've made amazing progress with the people we serve. They really are. Our vision, and my vision for community power, is to put people at the heart of everything we do. Every decision that is made should be with and for and alongside the people we serve. And I say to my workforce, if we didn't have a community to serve, we wouldn't have a job. Or there's an interdependence there. And when we talk about power, it's very interesting. You can have power where you have control, or you can have power where you enable self-determination. And if people have power over their own lives, if we have power over our own lives, we live happier, healthier and longer. And that's so important. So this discussion about power is so, so important. In East Ayrshire, what it's manifested itself is we've looked at the skills and talents of the amazing people that we serve, and we weren't making full use of those skills and talents. And the work that we did alongside our communities, informed by brilliant research and practice in Wigan, research around asset-based community development, and work that was emerging from our Chief Medical Officer at the time, Sir Harry Burns, about having self-determination, really resulted in us changing the conversation that we had with communities. We had deep listening sessions, not consultation, not engagement, where we were quiet and listened to what people thought of us, what they needed from us in the future. And then we worked alongside them to design a new way of working. We called it Vibrant Communities. It wasn't a service, and there was a real blurring of the lines between public servants, the people they serve, and all of the other sectors, including business. It was about all of us sharing our skills and talents equally and bringing things to the table to improve lives. And how that's manifested itself in East Ayrshire, I think one of the biggest things is, to me, you can't have community power unless you really empower the workforce who serve them, and they have a different way of serving. They move much more into an enabling and amplifying role alongside the people we serve, listening to their hopes and dreams and working with them to realise them. And sometimes the role of a public servant is to step back and not get involved. Sometimes we get involved in things that we shouldn't. And when I do big conferences like this, and I haven't done any for a while and I'm loving this, I would normally show a helicopter taking a dog for a walk. And that is to illustrate all of us over-engineering solutions for all the right reasons. So the helicopter's in the air, the dog's walking along. My goodness, the dog got his outcome. But what happens if the helicopter speeds up? And how much did it cost to put the helicopter in the air? So I think there's something about us rethinking and reimagining how we serve. And I'll tell you that the benefits are incredible. In East Ayrshire, we've moved away from focusing on deficiencies to focusing on strengths, what's right, what's strong and not what's wrong. We've moved away from talking about people as passive recipients, as clients or customers or service users. They're citizens, neighbours and co-producers. And we've been focusing on developing potential and not fixing people. Again, for all the right reasons, we've grown this dependency culture. But guess what? Most of our employees in East Ayrshire, and probably right across your authorities, 76% of our workforce live in the community. They are the community. So there's something there about that role blurring and people just wanting to look at the heart of place. What makes their heart sing and how do they work together to improve things? So really just finally to say, what has this all meant for East Ayrshire? Well, we've managed to do it at scale and it's been a difficult journey and we're not there yet. If we hadn't done this at scale, we couldn't have responded to COVID in the way that we had. It was a call to action and our communities have led our response to COVID with the council providing support and anything communities needed to do that. But what we've seen is 55 of our assets now run by the community, doing it better than we ever would, running golf courses and games halls and football pavilions and even a secondary school as a social enterprise. Our communities have attracted over £6 million that the council couldn't have got near, but actually they were able to do that. And most importantly, there are action plans in place that really detail their own hopes and dreams, their action plans, not ours. We sit in the audience at the launch and we work alongside them. So it's been a whole system change, but actually the system, it's broken the system a bit. And now we've moved to a much more full council approach, but we've still got a way to go. But it's been career changing for me and the colleagues who have worked in this way. And I can't say more that this is what a public servant should be. It's about service and it's about helping people to live the healthiest and happiest lives. Simple as that. And that's all. I'll stop there, Dawn. I don't want to run over my time.
That's brilliant, Katie. You're getting some fantastic feedback in the chat. And you make it sound really easy, like you just did it. But I know it's not been easy. So I think you'll get lots of questions later on. So please, if you've got anything you want to ask Katie, please post it in the chat and we will we'll get her to respond later on. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce an amazing, inspirational chair of Think Local, Act Personal, Mr. Clinton Farquharson, MBE. Can I hand over to you now, Clinton?
Thank you very much for that, Donna. Thank you for inviting me today. And I'd like, we are all here today because we share the new local convictions that we need, in their words, a fundamental shift in how public services work, to share power with people rather than hoard it. New local call this community paradigm. I have to admit, that's a big word for me. And I just think that it's exciting things that happen when people have control over their lives and communities. Take the Better Lives Alliance. This is a peer support group in Birmingham with a light touch, backing from the council. It brings together citizens and personal assistants and families, and they share information, ideas, action, and feed their concerns directly into the council decision-making process. It's small, it's slow, but it's transforming people's lives and aspirations. And even younger example is the introduction of community circles of support in Birmingham. This is a council strategy, but that's where the top-down approach ends. And genuine co-design and co-production is completely reshaping and the delivery of dynamic new approach. And at Think Local Personal, we work to create the conditions that will help the community to support itself by unleashing its capacity. We call this building community capacity, and we have seen it in action during the pandemic response when more power was put into the hands of local people. And I think this work began with Making It Real framework, and then Alex Fox's groundbreaking writing on asset-based areas. We then helped set up Social Care Innovation Network that supports collaboration, creativity across boundaries, working so that people had more control over their lives. We are now exploring how networks can join together the existing islands of best practice. One idea is a two-way knowledge base that helps communities do their own local thing, also inform government long-term planning for adult social care. In the briefing notes that New Local gave me, I was encouraged to share your vision and the ideas for how public services can drive the community power revolution. Well, communication people always tell me to come up with a list of 3, 5 or 7 points. So I would like to share with you my list of 2, 4 or 6. What I can say, I'm a rebel. I break the rules. So there are 2 things we should not do, I believe. First, we should not bask in the heartwarming stories and ignore the structural inequalities that need political will and organisational change. Second, we should not try to reproduce at community level all of the red tape that may be important to large organisations. It just doesn't work. Then there are 4 things we should do. 1, develop asset-based thinking and areas. 2, don't get hung up on processes and safeguarding. Respect people's ability to make their own decisions. 3, embrace true co-production with genuine power sharing. And final, the 4th, be prepared to let go. And community paradigms and sharing power takes time and is unpredictable. You cannot be sure where they will go, and they certainly won't comply with your project plans or Gantt charts, but there is an excitement and freedom in letting go. And we're at a crossroads right now. The pandemic has shown that we can change things and think differently. On the other hand, last week's budget shows that there may be future restrictions that will tempt organisations back into its old normal. We have to be brave and continue our work in putting people first and rethinking how services are commissioned and delivered. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks, Clinton. Never fails to impress. And, you know, in such an area that is crying out for community power in social care, how many years have we been waiting for this social care paper that will, you know, tap into the strengths we've got in our communities? And I know you're championing some really radical, different models in social care futures, Clinton. You're doing a fantastic job. Thank you. And, you know, just some really simple, helpful pointers for people who are trying to work differently with communities in social care. Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure there's loads of questions for you. You're getting some great feedback in the chat. Thanks, Clinton. And finally, we've got Dr. Juwida Idu, who is a brilliant GP working in Stockport with her innovative Alvani practice. You can tell us all about that. But she's also the lead for personalised care in the Greater Manchester Devolved Health and Care Partnership. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Juwida.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I feel really honoured to be here, and I've really enjoyed listening to the inspirational panel members already. And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm a GP and a medic. I'm just beginning to wonder whether you really want to hear this perspective, but I'm hoping today to share a bit about my journey as a GP and what's led me to where I've ended up. So Aldenley is a practice that I've worked in for more than 20 years. And we as medics focus on deficits, what's wrong with you? And we focus on what's wrong with you because that's how we diagnose an illness, complete a plan, and then work with you to fix you, because you come to your doctor because something's wrong with you. And what we started to realize when our workload was becoming incredibly unmanageable over 4 years ago was that actually people were coming to the GP because they had other social issues and social determinants that couldn't be met within their community or within other statutory services. So at least 1 in 5 people I saw didn't actually have a medical need, and I actually didn't know what to do about it. And you don't want to medicalise something that isn't medical. And so we started to look at different approaches with an organisation called Altogether Better. And we started to look at how we empower our patients who are our community, our citizens, how we empower them to support each other and support people who have those 1 in 5 social determinants that a GP can't help. And so we ended up with 18 incredible volunteers, patients of mine who I'd only ever really recognised in a deficit way, people with lung disease, people with who in the last year of their life from the conditions that they had. And when they came together, they were incredibly powerful because they came from a strength-based approach. They talked about things they're good at. So growing vegetables, singing, playing the guitar, playing the keyboard, and they quickly set up a singing group, a walking group, and we now have the Alvanley allotment. And what we realized is that when the community supports itself with what the strengths they have, and we could support patients to go to these community activities, we reduce loneliness, we increase connectivity, and people started to find a purpose. We then started to work with our local shops as well. So our local cafe tended to be quite quiet on a Wednesday. And so the singing group went there. And what we found was that it was standing room only. So we were supporting an SME to actually sell coffees and bring people together. And so 4 years down the line, what my biggest reflections have been is that you have to actually let people lead. It's not about partnership anymore. The paradigm shift for me is from illness to wellness. And really, if you let people lead and advise you as a healthcare professional in that setting as a GP, you'll actually end up having not just a better practice. We have less consultations, we have longer consultations, we have more capacity to do the medical bit, but actually the community are strengthening and building themselves. And our allotment's amazing. We do group consultations there for diabetics. We were cooking diabetic-friendly meals. And again, they were taking ownership, learning together, supporting each other. And the next step for the practice is where our patients will now tell us how they want a plan for the next 5 years. So it won't be a strategy that's led by the general practice or the practitioner. It'll be a strategy and a plan that they have led. And I'm so excited about that because they seem to do a much better job than I do at sorting some of these things out. So I've learned a lot from them, and the pandemic has been inspirational. The way we've come together, supported isolated patients, helped them use tablets, and also helped them to really be inclusive and stay connected with food deliveries and prescriptions. And that I could not have done that as a GP practice. I did that by being part of the community, and I see myself as very much as part of that community. So that's my practice perspective. I'll have to keep the GM role and all the other roles for later, but again, it's influencing at a GM footprint, those types and styles of working. The key for me, the final message is integrate around the person, don't integrate services.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Joida. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head about having a purpose. you know, very often we kind of ignore that, don't we, when we're designing public services, and we ignore our own purpose as public servants. And I think, you know, both, all three of you have mentioned that being really important in doing what you do. So thanks so much. Brilliant presentations. We've got some questions coming in now through the chat. And the first question is from Laura James, who's just starting out on her journey in Hounslow. And it's a question for Katie. Really resonates with me, this one. How do you make a vision for community power, an argument, a whole council approach, and not just something that the community engagement team does? Katie?
Thanks very much, Donna. That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think it's actually that when we started out with this, we looked at a whole system change. So when we brought the Vibrant Communities group of employees together, it was about 120. We made sure it wasn't just the people that would typically do community engagement. So we looked at people who could really add value, and that was based on what Communities has told us. So we included community workers with community health improvement teams. We included people who, though, were estate surveyors, because Communities wanted to take over the facilities. We even had a lawyer in there. And so what happened was the dynamic of the way we serve changed, and we moved it away from a silo approach to say that department does community engagement, because actually that you're only going to get what you put in. So we did change the kind of makeup of the workforce who initially were involved in this. And thereafter, we called it the Vibrant Effect. So I've got some colleagues in the room, Suzanne and Linda, my colleague Griffiths, are in. We called it the Vibrant Effect. It started with a small group within the organisation, about 120 staff, but they represented nearly every department. And then we started to build it up. So we brought in housing and communities. So housing officers started to work this way. And actually what happens, the same as happens in the community, where strength grows strength grows strength as a connectedness. Employees in the council started to want to work that way. So we made it a desirable thing rather than a compulsory thing. So people say, well, I want to work in that way. Job description second, service first. And it's exactly what Clinton says. It's so liberating to be able to say, yes, let's do this together. Let's let go. Let's find a way to say yes. Not computer says no, as Donna said at the start, because we've both been there. And also not that overcoming people's worry about risk or about policy and strategy, but much more about service. So it's been a slow burn. We've been at this now since 2013. And I would say, most of our front-facing workforce work this way. So it's well over maybe 2,500, 3,000 people working in that very much enabled way alongside communities. And we've still got a job to do. There's 6,000 employees, and we're working now really learning from Wigan about the kind of Wigan experience and Be Wigan experience. We've used FACE in East Ayrshire, which was crowdsourced from our employees, flexible, approachable, caring and empowered. And that's to embed those values in every one of our workforce. We're not there yet, but it takes time. And actually the way we've done it is we don't make it compulsory. We want people to want to come. And it's been the same with the communities. They came on board when they saw what their next door community was doing, rather than saying, you have to do this, you're next. It's about people wanting to be part of something, and then you're more likely to be able to make it happen at scale. I hope that answers the question. We're still not there. We're still moving towards that.
I think it's a constant journey, isn't it? And what the King's Fund said about Wigan was, and it's not exclusive to Wigan, but it was clarity of purpose with the deal, and then constancy of purpose, that you stick with it. This is not easy. This is the hardest stuff I've ever done in in my whole career. And I think making sure you've got a kind of open-minded approach to trying things that might not work, and that's quite difficult when you're working sometimes with politicians, isn't it, Katie? We want everything to work so that it's ready for the next election. So it's all about the people, isn't it, who work in public services. And it's really hard when you work in, say, an NHS organisation, because the NHS is a big machine, isn't it, Joida and Clinton, and social care is designed along a kind of risk-based framework, isn't it, to try and stop making any mistakes. So how do we influence people on the front line in health and social care to think and act differently with local communities? This is a real challenge for us, I think, isn't it? So I'll start with you, Clinton. How do we influence the mindset?
The key for me to influence the mindset is the language that we use. When I acquired my disability and I entered the two tribes of health and social care, the language that was put on me through the service delivery of social care or the NHS put words or saw me differently, like, you know, disabled person, which came with risk as they perceived it. And this played out in the pandemic, like the language of vulnerable. All of a sudden, I became a vulnerable person, not looking at the context. And context is everything. But we use this label of vulnerable as a blanket, but didn't look at the context and situation that people found themselves in. Because I'm a disabled person and have long-term conditions, doesn't necessarily make me vulnerable, that everybody then has to. But it's about asking questions, being curious about one another. It's a bit about rebooting humanity. And the biggest issue around humanity is being curious about each other.
Yeah, brilliant. Juwida, what do you think?
Well, I suppose, you know, the most important thing, and I've worked in acute hospital around sort of discharge, etc., and also at the practice, you have to actually stop saying what's the matter with you. You have to stop saying what's wrong with you, and you have to start asking people what matters to them. And once you start to have that kind of conversation, a different conversation around what's important to you, what matters to you, you can then use that conversation to see what you can contribute to support them. And for too long, we use social services and in a way to risk assess, and we keep people locked when actually they want to be empowered to leave their home, they want to be empowered to go shopping or go to a football match. What do we really do that actually supports that individual to achieve their goals and what they want? And I think if I've learned anything, the conversation changes. The conversation has to change with that person, and you can support frontline staff to do that. And that's one of the things we're very much pushing in general practice. But I think that conversation needs to happen throughout every service, wherever you are. What's important to you and what matters to you. And then frontline staff can be really empowered to start to support that individual to be the best person that they want to be and live the best life that they want to live. And we're too busy saying, oh no, you can't do this, that's too dangerous, or no, you can't do that, because we're frightened of consequences. So another thing we need to do is remove the barriers as organisations that empower our frontline staff to not worry about the risk, but focus again on the opportunity.
Definitely. We've got another question in the chat from the brilliant Professor Colin Talbot, who's been a real voice of radical change during this pandemic, alongside me and others on Test and Trace and the power of local. So thanks, Colin, for your question. What can go wrong with community power? Because sometimes we'll try things and they won't work. Can each of you just talk us through something that you tried that didn't work and what you learned from it? It sounds like an interview. Katie?
Yeah, so I think when things go wrong, it's quite good, as long as it's handled really well, because we'll never ever learn if we don't make mistakes. I know that's scary in terms of public sector, because there's an issue about risk and that kind of thing. But for me, as long as you understand the risk, I always used to say to my teams, and still do, what's the worst thing that can happen here? If we're serving. So I think from our perspective, when we embarked in community asset transfer, I think it didn't go wrong, but it took a lot longer than we thought, because people taking on facilities, it was a big ask of people. And we had to actually build trust. We had a great policy in place that was all approved and had everything in it. But actually, it was all about the relationships. It's really what's been said here today already. So for us, what went wrong is, I think we expected that we'd be able to do a whole programme of community asset transfer, done and dusted in a couple of years. Some of them have taken 4 and 5 years to come to fruition. But actually, so it was probably our perception that was wrong. And then handling that perception corporately to say, well, you haven't released savings, or you haven't made this dream happen. And people say, be patient, because actually we move at the speed of trust. And so from my point of view, it's sometimes the wrong thing we can do is overestimate how quickly this kind of work can be done. If it's really deeply based in trust and you want it to be sustainable, you need to take the time, and it takes as long as it takes, but the results are beautiful and the process along the way are thrilling. But there's sometimes pressure if it's releasing savings, or if there's people maybe dissenters or non-believers in this way of working, that proves that, you know, that this wasn't the way to go. So it's hard to balance that sometimes. So I think that was wrong of us to believe we could do that programme so quickly. But what happened after two years, it started to accelerate because people saw it could be successful. But it took that long for people to trust. And I think that's so important. It's all about relationships.
Definitely. Joida?
I suppose I call it failing well, because failing well for me is a learning opportunity. And you've got to move to a culture where you move away from blame and you really feel safe to learn from your mistakes. And we know in the services that we've worked in, whether the trust, the council, or you know, the CCG, or even general practice, sometimes it's hard to fail well because you might have let down a patient or a treatment. But unless you learn from that and take the opportunity to make improvements that prevent something that's gone wrong from happening again, then you can never make improvements moving along. And I think the other thing is around, it depends what the failure is. So I think we just heard the word financial savings. You failed to make savings. And we constantly have that, you know, in health and social care. And yet, how do we measure success then? You can't measure it just based on financial savings. We have to measure it on the impact and improvement for people and for communities. We have to measure it based on those social determinants. Have we reduced health inequalities? Have we reduced the gap between people of ethnic minorities who have different health experiences or have had different experiences during COVID? How are we really measuring? Because failure to me is not doing the right thing, and failure is not empowering others and freeing others to do the right thing. So failing well.
Brilliant. Clinton?
For me, I would say it's the power of vulnerability. Because as people, we want greater clarity, you know, in our purpose, and understanding of that deeper, more meaningful. I think it's spiritual lives, but we don't like to be vulnerable, and vulnerability isn't an emotion, and we have to walk along that path. But that can be scary, but it's embracing that, you know, and vulnerability takes courage to, you know, to show up, face our fears, and move forward. So I would say, dare. You must dare, you know, to be yourself, and that's the hardest thing, you know, to dare to be yourself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Clinton. Okay, another question for you all, if that's okay. How do we turn this into a proper social movement, which starts in local places, but then people get confident and spread it out? Because we've got a very, you know, centralising policy agenda at the national level at the moment. In England, we've got, you know, different approaches in Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. But, you know, generally, we're not seeing this being embraced as a different way of working. We've got, you know, think tanks falling out with each other about the right way forward, which is just bonkers. We should all be working together on this, shouldn't we? You know, no one's got the monopoly on good ideas. Let's work together towards a new vision. So how can we make this something that is just the way we work everywhere? I'll start off with this time with Clinton.
We have to see what we have in common. We often talk about our differences. Let's see what the ties that bind us together. And one of the things how we talk about, you know, economics or social or psychological things, if we look at economical with regards who holds and manages wealth and resources, how do we have those conversations? The second is, for me, social. How do we shift the power dynamics through social and professional spaces? in all those spaces, people with lived experience who draw on the different systems that we've created in society should be part of the conversation to co-design them. And then you mentioned earlier about the psychological safety. We have to erase what we perceive as the norm that ends up just the majority being in that space and marginalises more of the people who feel the least, in decision-making spaces. So we need to look at how we reshape that and redesign, because one of the biggest barriers is people think inequality is at an individual level and individualised. It's structural, and we need to have those conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Joeida?
I suppose when I think of social movement, I think of Gant's theory, it's all to do with relationships and conversations and how people connect with each other. So we call it the Alvanley way, but we now have 4 sister practices already in Stockport who are working in the same way and starting to think differently about their relationship as practices and communities and partnership working with them. And I think that's come from the fact that actually it's the communities that are linking with each other and sharing ideas. And how do you empower and enable them? Well, you don't need to, because they can empower themselves, they can self-organize, they use social media, they have their Facebook pages, and they're willing and open to come to each other's, communities within Stockport and share ideas, and more widely than that. So I think there's something about trust in those communities to lead, and they know their communities, they know how things work, and they know how to connect with people, and just allow that to happen. Really, it's not for us as professionals or public servants to project manage it, which I can't stand because I'm not very good at project management. I'm a bit of a rebel myself, but it's just trust them, because they live their lives themselves. We can't live it for them. And I've been so impressed by the way that they have all connected across Stockport. It's now become one Stockport. It's the team around the person. The community are part of the team, and the community have some leadership within that team. We've still got a long way to go. We've got 3 more neighbourhoods to get, but we're working on it, and it's our citizens that are leading it. So that's my kind of view around power shifting, is just let the right people lead and enjoy it, because it makes a difference to statutory services. They use them less. It's a win-win.
Brilliant. Katie?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit radical, because I think connectedness is so important, and it is, for me, it becomes a movement of change. And what I've always hoped is it becomes unstoppable, so that it won't need us. It'll become something where the confidence grows, the horizontal connections. If that community can do it, they connect with the next door one. In East Ayrshire, we've had some lovely examples of where some of our communities would be described as our most deprived, or showing some of our most affluent how to organise and engage. And I just love that. That to me is about rebalancing. But I'm going to go a bit further, and as a Deputy Chief Exec, I could be in trouble for this. That movement, unstoppable movement of change, needs to lead to the dismantling of structures and systems, because the structures and systems then become closer and closer to it. There's friction between this movement of change. So, and the beauty of that is if it's done in a relational way, not as a forced way. A structure or a system becomes no longer fit for purpose. Some would argue many of us have not been fit for purpose for many, many years. If you're looking at the work of Hilary Cottam and hierarchies, after the war, we talk about front line, we use all these military analogies. What we're finding is actually when we de-stratify, move away from hierarchical work, people are freer to work alongside. So I think there's something about how the relationship of an unstoppable changing community movement of power and confidence and being able to do things for themselves, then they will expect more from us or different from us. And then we need to start dismantling structures and systems. And we've started to do that to an extent in East Ayrshire around taking out some of the leadership roles and actually looking at self-empowered teams. And that's been fascinating work to do. It's very groundbreaking. I know I can see Berkshires here. We've learned a lot from them around that. but that then equalises power. If you really talk about equalising power, we're going to have to look at what's no longer fit for purpose and make some hard decisions and brave decisions to say it's time now to destructure things. And that is a radical thing for a Deputy Chief Executive to say, I may be out of a job by the end of the day because I'll be no longer needed in a hierarchy.
No, we definitely need you in the hierarchy and in the social movement. We've got literally 1 minute left now. So I just wanted to ask you all, 3 inspirational leaders, why is everyone not doing this everywhere? You know, what is the problem? You've all made it sound dead easy, but I know it's not, you know, and why don't people learn from what's there? Remember, in Wigan, we would have more visitors from Denmark than we would have from the rest of Greater Manchester. You know, why don't people just do this stuff? It works, and shape it around their own people. 1 sentence, Clinton.
Yeah.
Brilliant. 1 word, brilliant. Joida?
He stole my word. Clinton stole my word. So I put fear, and then the second word, I'll have to put a second one now in Clinton. Risk.
Katie?
Well, I'll add the 3 together. Risk and fear of changing the status quo.
Thank you so much. You've been an absolute, just brilliant session. I can't think of a word to describe. There's lots of people clapping and cheering you on. You are inspirational to me and to all of us here today at Stronger Things. You've really talked about the stronger things you're building on in your communities and in your networks, and we're so grateful for your time today. Absolutely brilliant people to learn from.